Select Committee on Living Wage Jobs order. Thank you, Representative Kiefer and Allen. I think we're going to be joined by some other members, but I'd rather get started because we have a full agenda. And thank you also to Ann Markison, the committee consultant, for joining us today. First on the agenda is Steve Hine from the Department of Employment and Economic Development. He's going to give us a background on contingent worker arrangements, I think is the phrase. You could identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Chair Winkler. And thank you, committee, for inviting me back. My name's Steve Hine. I'm the research director at the Department of Employment and Economic Development. Work in the Labor Market Information Office there that is responsible for, among other things, the publication of today's released unemployment rate and other items. Been asked to come to talk about, as Chair Winkler said, contingent workers, as we call them in the back rooms. That is, workers that, for one reason or another, don't expect their job to last, specifically don't expect them to last for more than a year. Talk about the measurement of some of these so-called contingent workers. I want to describe different categories of contingent workers. And also, I think, emphasize the difficulty that we have in measuring some of these kinds of workers. They can be put into four broad categories. The first one is independent contractors. That perhaps is relatively self-evident. They would generally be considered to be self-employed, and so would be a subset of the self-employed. Another type of contingent worker are those that are provided by contracting firms. So they may work for a firm but do work at the bequest of another business that has extended a contract to their employer. Third are on-call workers, those that are on call, work as needed. And then fourth is temporary help workers. And I do have more to say about those, fortunately. All right, so let me go through each of these one by one and have relatively little to say about some of them. Independent contractors, as I mentioned, are a subset of the self-employed. The measurement of that category is primarily through the current population survey that's conducted each month by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It does collect national level data on self-employed, but on a month-to-month basis doesn't distinguish those self-employed between their types, and specifically don't identify the number of independent contractors amongst the self-employed on a month-to-month basis. There are periodic supplements to the current population survey that are designed to dig into the question of the types of contingent workers in more detail, and specifically does identify the number of independent contractors and other categories. But the last one that was conducted was done in 2005. Although the President's budget for fiscal year 13 did include an appropriation for the conduct of another supplement next year, February of 2014. And while I tried to find out more specifically if that is still in the works, I don't know that for sure, but my understanding is that there will be another supplement coming out 9 years since the last one. When you read some of the research about independent contractors, I will note that oftentimes research is based on a count of 1099s that are submitted, but these count all individuals throughout the tax year generally, and so can quite significantly overstate the number of individuals that are working on a contract at any point in time. It's generally the case that about 60% of self-employed are independent contractors. At least that was the case during that last supplemental study done in 2005. Self-employment has generally trended downward since 1967 and has continued to do so over the last 10 years here, including here in Minnesota. That's primarily for two reasons. One is just a general decline in agricultural employment, where not an absolute majority, but a disproportionate share of self-employment does occur. The second is an increasing tendency because of tax allowances now that exist in many states, including Minnesota, towards incorporation. So LLCs, once an individual, a sole proprietorship, a partnership, or what have you, incorporates, they are no longer considered self-employed for the purpose of these counts.
Mr. Hine, could I
Yes.
just interrupt you with a question? I want to make sure I understand that. So if an individual was once counted as self-employed, say in 1970, working on their own, and they today decide to form an LLC for various reasons, they go out of the list of people who are considered self-employed, even though it's an LLC of one.
Yep, Chair Winkler, that's absolutely right. Yes.
Thank
Yes. Now, to present some ideas as to the magnitude of self-employment in Minnesota in 2012, there were 46,000 self-employed individuals in agriculture. I was somewhat surprised to see that that puts us at number 2 in the nation in terms of the absolute number of individuals self-employed in agriculture, behind Texas. And there were 135,000 self-employed individuals in non-agriculture. Just to break that out a little bit, since the data does provide it, 75,000 of these 135,000 were men. 126 of the 135,000 were Caucasian. And again, that trend has gradually diminished over the last 10 years. On call, well, workers provided by contract firms. The bread and butter in our operation really is the unemployment insurance administrative data that we receive from Rick Caligieri's staff. That includes individuals that are on the payrolls of businesses, but doesn't distinguish whether those individuals are on those payrolls via a contract that their employer has with another business or not. So those would be included in our payroll count that we produce on a month-to-month basis, but we aren't able to discern those workers that are so employed via a contract versus otherwise being permanently employed by that business. On-call workers faces the same challenge. They generally appear and disappear, of course, from payroll job counts without distinction from other entrants and leavers from the payroll of that company. In 2005, again, referring back to that national study, there were about the number of on-call workers was about 25% of the number of independent contractors, which in turn, again, was about 60% of all self-employed. Now, temp help workers, those are individuals that are paid by the temporary placement firm, and they do appear in our monthly count. Again, we just released our November data, so this is hot off the press. As of November, there were 67,367 individuals employed in a category of firms called employment services. Somewhere just over 91% of employment services is employment at temp help firms. Now, that would include employees of those temp help firms that are actually working at the firm themselves, okay? But certainly the majority of employment here, and most certainly trends in the employment at these firms in employment services can be attributed to fluctuations, trends in temp help employment itself. This has been increasing lately. Employment service employment remains up by 2.4% over last year, and is up 42% over its trough in November of 2009. Now, it's a highly cyclical employment sector. That is, it tends to increase quite dramatically at the beginning of recoveries, and also tends to drop off quite dramatically at the beginning of recessions. So much of this increase over the last few years is certainly being driven by the fact that we are in a recovery in our economy, but also much of this increase is likely to be driven by shifts towards an outsourcing of many business services, including HR services. When we adopted what's called the North American Industry Classification System as an industry structure, this whole big sector called professional business services was added to capture all of the businesses that had arisen that were in the business of serving other businesses. It would include accountants and lawyers and computer systems design people, and it also includes employment services as well as janitorial and landscaping and so on. It's certainly been an area of the economy that has expanded, and much of the expansion in employment services is certainly going hand in hand with the tendency towards an outsourcing of a lot of those sort of backroom activities that used to be done in-house. So we have seen a dramatic increase in employment services and in temp help employment in particular. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Representative Kiefer.
I can't pass up the opportunity to ask some questions. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hine, I mean, I think a lot of us are just concerned about the employment rates in Minnesota and jobs and making sure everybody gets good jobs. I think that's why we're here. Given, like, in the last year, do you have any comparisons of employers in the state of Minnesota? How many have come in? How many new employers are in the state in the last year, or anything like that? I mean, we talk a lot about employees.
Broadly across all sectors of the economy?
Sure, whatever you have. I don't know if you have anything you didn't talk about. You talk a lot about these employees, but you can't be an employee without an employer, so I'm just wondering if there's any data on job growth in Minnesota and what kinds of businesses.
Mr. Hine.
Thank you. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to address specifically what you're looking for me to address. We do compile information on things like business births and business deaths, which I'd be happy to provide or direct the committee to. I could certainly talk about the areas in which we have seen the most dramatic growth. I will note, too, and I neglected to point this out, that not all temp help is necessarily hired through temp help agencies. So there'll be a lot of temporary employment embedded in these numbers across all sectors of the economy that we, again, don't have the ability to distinguish from the regular churn, the entrance and exits from jobs that happen on a routine basis.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Kiefer.
I guess I should ask you, what are we looking for here? What's the whole overall theme of what's going on today?
Representative Kiefer, what we're trying to address is the perceived rise in temporary employment versus full-time permanent employment, the use of contract employment, and sort of the four categories of employment that Mr. Hine laid out for us. I don't think we're going to get much into on-call workers, but we're trying to understand more about that section of the economy, specifically since we've had an opportunity to talk about a lot of other things in this committee. So we're trying to focus in on those kind of four categories he talked about.
Ben, can I ask one more question,
Representative
please?
Kiefer.
Okay, Mr. Hine. On the contract workers and temporary workers, do you have any data that is just, this is a choice for these people? Like, they like the temporary work, they like to have a variety, or it fits more with their personal lifestyle? Do you have any data like that?
Well,
Mr. Hine.
Thank you. Again, referring back to the 2005 study, and until this new study hopefully comes out early next year, I don't have any other information. But one thing I did note that was of interest was the finding that while the majority of independent contractors, 82% of them, preferred their work arrangement to a traditional job, only 32% of temporary help agency workers preferred their current arrangement. So it certainly was the case then that
Could you repeat that, please?
so 82% of independent contractors preferred independent contracting to a traditional job, but only 32% of temp help agency workers preferred their current arrangement to a traditional job.
Representative Kiefer.
Mr. Chair, then I would just like to ask you, if the new study's coming early next year, why wouldn't we wait to have this hearing until we can get more accurate data?
Representative Kiefer, I think that there will be an opportunity to review those survey results, and we could certainly ask Mr. Hine to provide different numbers, but it's just mostly a question of timing and trying to squeeze enough things in, and I don't know when the results are actually going to be available, and that's a good question to Mr. Hine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you know?
Chairman,
I mean, we ask him that?
When this was done in 2005, the report was released in late July on the basis of data that were collected during February.
So,
Representative
Mr.
Kiefer.
Hine, thank you. When should we expect that report then?
Late
Did you say July? Okay. I think,
Representative Kiefer.
Mr. Chair, I think there's another report that Dolly is supposed to receive pretty soon, in the beginning of the year. Is there, do you know anything about that, or is there somebody from Dolly that could answer that question?
Representative
I do not.
No,
Representative
okay.
Kiefer, I did see someone.
There's one.
Yes, Dolly maybe can try to answer your question.
I'm John Rakowski, the Legislative Director for the Department of Labor and Industry, and we will be coming forward at the end of the year with a report to the legislature. It was the result of a bill passed 2 years ago to create a 2-year pilot project to register subcontractors who aren't otherwise licensed or certified with the department within the construction industry. And the results of that, it was a voluntary registration program, and we received nearly 12,000 people registered. So I just was briefed on the study, and we'll have a proposal to extend that one more year, the pilot project, Mr. Chairman. And the findings of that will be delivered to the legislature January 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ward, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hine, I apologize if I missed this in your introduction. Defining independent contractor, that's a pretty broad category, isn't it? Really, from real estate agents who consider themselves full-time employed to people who are doing independent consulting, on a variety of subjects. How would you define independent contractor, or can you give us some range of what those jobs include, because it isn't limited, and I think that would be helpful.
Mr. Hine.
Representative Chairman Winkler, you're absolutely right. That really is one dimension in which this question, measurement, it becomes a really challenging issue because of that diversity of work arrangements that do exist now. But an independent contractor is essentially somebody that is working under, a stipulated and a arrangement that has a end date, and specifically within 1 year for the purpose of the analysis that's done by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the tabulation of these numbers. So they are jobs that are expected to end within the year, that are done under that kind of contract. But the type of work can vary quite significantly. Yeah.
Mr. Hine, there was a request from Dolly to add to that, I think.
Well, I'd like to add that in the statute 181, 723 is a definition for independent contractor, and it's commonly referred to as the 9-factor test. So, there's one that's listed in the statute. There's 9 provisions. If you meet, let's see, what does it say? I haven't read this for a while. It says an individual is an independent contractor and not an employee of the person for whom the individual is performing services in the course of a person's trade, business, profession, or occupation, only if the individual is registered with the Department of Labor and Industry. So that's our definition for independent contractor. My understanding, we haven't visited this issue for several years, but Department of Revenue uses an IRS definition. I believe for UI purposes, you might have your own definition as well. So if that helps, or maybe I just clouded the issue further.
Representative Ward, I think that, it seems like the testimony is fairly clear that there are various definitions of what this means. But since we asked the labor economist to present, I guess we'll just go with his for today. Mr. Hine, I have a kind of a follow-up question. You talked about, I want to make sure I get the right name here, temporary help workers, and you talked about the impact of the recession. Do you have any longer-term trends that you can talk about in that category?
Certainly, Chairman Winkler. We have monthly estimates going back to 1990. Back in the early 1990s, we frequently saw employment levels of around 25,000. Again, this is in that employment services category, 90% of which, again, would be at temp help agencies. That has very steadily increased, but it really began to increase quite rapidly with the expansion of the 1990s. By 2000, the monthly employment average for that year, 2000, was just over 56,000. Actually, in 1999, it was 63,000. It dropped off then during the recession in the early 2000s, bottoming out at 47,400 roughly in 2001. Steadily increased to 60,900, 61,000 in 2006, before again falling off during the recession, and has now increased and topped 70,000 for the first time ever in August of this year. Now stands at just over 67,000 in November. So there's been a secular, a steady upward trend, with those recessions being a very cyclically sensitive sector in our economy, giving rise to pretty significant downturns in employment during those times.
Sure. One final question for me. Has the typical, you alluded to this, but it's my understanding that the typical trend is that as employers are looking at an economic recovery, they are turning first to temporary work because they're not sure about the long-term trends, and so they're trying to add people in to fill in their capacity, productive capacity, and then as the economy strengthens and orders keep coming in, they tend to shift those people into full-time employment, and that's why you start with rapid growth at the beginning of recovery and it tails off. You're nodding your head yes. I think I'm capturing it.
That is the general narrative that one hears about this highly cyclical nature of the industry, and certainly the data don't suggest anything to refute that narrative.
And then, so the final question, Mr. Hine, then is, has this recession and recovery followed that same model?
Yes, it has.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Seeing no further questions, we will move on to Jessica Webster, Legal Aid. Mr. Hine, can you stick around for a little while, just in case other questions pop up? Please identify yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Jessica Webster. I'm a staff attorney with Legal Aid, actually with the Legal Services Advocacy Project. We represent low-income Minnesotans statewide in civil legal matters. The reason I'm here today is we have a number of staff attorneys who specialize in unemployment insurance, and it's nice to follow Mr. Hine because the surge that he has described in temp workers is exactly what we have seen in our offices. He mentioned that, we hit the highest point ever in August, almost 71,000 temp workers in Minnesota. And, whether or not this is a cyclical industry, when you look at 1990, as he described, and look at a number of 25,000, we're up to 71,000. To us and to the people that we represent, it kind of represents the new normal for work. And we have thousands of people coming through our doors who are, in fact, workers. Many are facing an economic hardship because they've lost a job or they cannot find a job. And you would probably be surprised at how many of them have a work history in temp work or are working in temp work and are not making ends meet. And that's one of the reasons that we have a perspective on this, and we also have an unemployment insurance perspective that I can share just a little bit later. One of the things that Representative Winkler mentioned and Steve Hyde also mentioned is that this allows businesses to use workers when they need them. And what it does is it means that they don't have to pay the usual compensation that would be required for using these workers. It is a cost savings. If you look across the temp industry and look at their websites and their materials, they market themselves as a cost saver to businesses. And one of the things that they take on is this unemployment insurance burden. So employers are really avoiding paying the unemployment tax and the unemployment claims, and they just put it on the temp industry. The temp agency industry has worked hard to, as I would say, really kind of rebrand itself. You don't see these businesses are not called temp agencies anymore. They're not called. Many of them have changed their names. They've taken the word temporary out. They like to be seen as the staffing industry, employment services. They talk about themselves as recruiting talent and matching employers with talent. And there definitely is a sector of the employment services industry that it's very professional. There's management. There's higher income accountants, financial services, paralegals, medical device professionals, and that's not the folks that I'm representing, and those aren't the folks that we see come into our offices. If you look at the top 6 occupations in temp work, it's laborers and freight workers, stocking, assembly, office clerks, production lines, packers and packagers, and customer service representatives. These employees that we work with, these temp workers, they're not getting paid benefits. They're not getting, I think I saw Express Employment Professionals has a fact sheet out today that shows benefits of holiday pay, vacation pay, medical, dental, vision, life, 401k. That is nowhere near anything we have ever seen our clients experience. If we do have a temp worker that has some sick time or some paid vacation time, we might be seeing them because they haven't been able to access it, and we're fighting to try to help them access the sick day that they were given in the last 2 years. So the temp agency industry looks very different depending on where you are at, kind of on its spectrum. What this means for the workers that we represent, I think some of the data that you've seen from Deborah Schlick, who's now at DHS, who did a research project with DEED, is about, if you look at people in our welfare caseload, about 20% of them have work history in temp work. We see them on our SNAP, our food support caseload. We see them accessing child care dollars in Minnesota. We see them needing health care. So they are a cost to Minnesota in other ways because of these very low wages and complete lack of benefits that they're getting. Deborah Schlick's research also showed that a large percentage of workers in temp agencies just have persistently low wages. They're one of the industries where low-wage earners are least likely to kind of achieve this American dream of moving up a pay ladder, moving up a pay scale. They could be at, I represented a woman last year who'd been at about $8 an hour for 12 years, working in a healthcare temp agency or temp work role. Temp workers have schedules that are often unpredictable. They often have little control over their scheduling. You might get hired on first shift, and 2 months later you're asked to work second or third shift. When I've been before the legislature in the last few years, sometimes I just come and I read temp work listings. I wasn't able to do it this morning, but I'll pull temp work listings off of a website and read them to you. And I think it was last year, the year before, that I read one that said, must be able to work first, second, or third shift. Must be able to stand for 12 hours. Also note, slight risk of electric shock. So these are not necessarily all, when Representative Kiefer asked whether people like these jobs or not, I think people are grateful to have a job. I think that they have hired, the temp agency industry has hired people at a time when a lot of businesses weren't hiring, and that's something that temp workers were grateful for. But when you ask someone whether they'd like to be in a temp position or a permanent position, they want to be in the permanent position. And one of the things that you see across temp agency materials, so many jobs are marketed as temp to hire or potential for permanent placement. I mean, so many of them, just go and look at these websites. I mean, it's something that I think people use to weed through, because they don't want a 6-week assignment. They don't want a 3-month assignment. They want something that could turn into permanent employment with 3M or with a school district. The temp agency industry is used across our entire sector. And so it's not just one pocket that's using temp work. We see them in school food service. We see them in janitorial. We see them in Minnesota's biggest employers across the state. So workers really would like to land permanent jobs with paid benefits and paid sick time and higher wages at these employers. The last piece that I just wanted to touch on is unemployment insurance. We have had significant problems with helping temp workers access unemployment insurance. As I said before, the temp agency has really taken on the burden of the unemployment insurance tax and helping pay the claim to the worker. And the temp agency industry has a carve-out in statute that's different from any other employer, and it makes it very difficult for employees to access unemployment insurance in many different circumstances. I was hoping to have data from DEED here today that showed the numbers of claims, denials, appeals. I don't have that, and I'm hoping that they will share that with this committee at a soonish date. But from what I understand, the temp agency has provided a tremendous administrative burden just on the department because they're always fighting these claims. And we have people who are eligible, should be eligible, have worked the requisite number of hours, have worked the requisite number of, have done everything in their job they're supposed to. They lose the job through no fault of their own. They should be eligible for unemployment insurance, and the temp agency doesn't want to pay it. And so that's a barrier that legal aid is kind of uniquely up against with these temp workers as we try to help them obtain unemployment insurance. So just in closing, legal aid will probably be up at the legislature the next session, hoping and asking the legislature to make sure that the unemployment insurance system fully covers workers as it was intended to do. And we don't just let employers, we obviously let employers not pay this cost and transfer it to this kind of third party, the temp agency industry. We can't let the temp agency industry evade that responsibility. So that's, we will be bringing forth legislation, hopefully, that the legislature will consider.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Kiefer.
Thank you. Ms. Webster, how many people, because according to Mr. Hine, he says 67,000 were working in temporary jobs, and I'm assuming this is what we're talking about. So how many are your clients?
Ms. Webster.
Like, how many people are you dealing with?
Mr. Chair, Representative Kiefer, I can't answer that based on what I have in front of me. No, I mean, I don't even know if I could get that number for you. I can tell you how many legal aid clients we've had statewide. We could get that data for you, but we don't have their full work histories. And
Well, that's all I want.
Representative Kiefer.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, that's all I'm asking is how many, I'm just trying to get a percentage of the 67,000, how many are actually coming to you for help? That's all I need. So if you could get that, that would be great.
Mr. Chair, Representative Kiefer, I can't promise that to you. I mean, I can tell you how many clients legal aid serves and how many unemployment insurance cases we've taken. Legal aid is, as you know, very, very under-resourced. We cannot take everybody who comes to us with a problem. And in fact, when unemployment insurance issues come to us, we can only take a very small percentage of them, and we send most people to the Court of Appeals by themselves and give them advice and tell them how to represent themselves. And I think if you asked Deed, how many people are pro se representing themselves in court on unemployment insurance matters, it's, I think, somewhere in the 70 to 80% range. Now, not all those are temp cases, but we couldn't possibly take 50,000 UI cases if they were presented to us.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Kiefer.
The very nature is it's temporary, and these folks are going through this agency and trying to get a foot in the door and trying to gain employment or gain skills or build a resume. Is there, and maybe you guys, like you've mentioned, maybe you're understaffed or under whatever, do you have, because in Jobs Committee we talk about workforce development with lots of different organizations like that to help folks. Are you cooperating with some of these other resources to try to get these people more stable and prepared for something more long-term if that's what they really want?
Ms. Webster.
Mr. Chair, Representative Kiefer, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. We work with workforce centers across the state. We work with county financial workers, employment service providers. We work with the entire spectrum. One of the things you mentioned is that these jobs are temporary. One of the kind of facets of this industry that we see, I represented a woman last summer who'd been working for the same temp agency for 12 years. So while her assignments were cyclical, she'd been with the same agency all along and had never seen a pay increase, was not paid benefits, did not have a 401k, there was no benefits. But it was a job. It was a stable job for her, and when there were clients for her to work with, she had pay. So not all of the, I don't want to give the impression that all temp work is a 6-week assignment or a 3-month assignment, because we do have people who are working do many temp assignments over many years with the same temp agency.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Kiefer.
I really need to have those numbers then. And I would think since you're running this organization, you've got to have some data on how many people you're talking about here. So I'd really ask to have that submitted at some point, sometime in the next session or something. I just can't believe that you'd run an organization and not have some data on how many clients you're serving.
Mr. Chair, Representative Kiefer,
Ms. Webster.
I don't run legal aid. I'm a staff attorney with legal aid, but we can absolutely provide you the numbers of clients that legal aid serves and that Mid-Minnesota Legal Assistance serves. Absolutely.
Okay.
Ms. Kiefer, I think it's important to point out also that Mr. Hines' testimony, I think, is characterized primarily by what we don't know. We don't. I mean, the difficulty in assessing what's really going on in temporary help, the 63,000, 70,000. Those are folks who work in this industry, but as he pointed out, that doesn't include all the people who are temporary workers directly for employers. So, I mean, there's tremendous variability in all of this. I think it's very hard to get precise numbers. In fact, that's one of the takeaways I would have, is that as this section of the economy continues to be more relevant, it would seem like we should be better able to extract data about what's going on.
Mr. Chair, then maybe I have a question for
Representative
Mr. Hine is, and maybe Ms. Webster would know this, do independent contractors have the ability to collect unemployment insurance?
Ms. Webster?
Mr. Chair, Representative Kiefer, I don't believe that independent contractors are covered employment.
Mr. Chair, do they pay into unemployment insurance?
Representative Kiefer,
No.
I wonder if Mr. Hine can represent Deed since he was designated earlier.
Chairman Winkler, Representative Kiefer. I'll talk on Rick Caligiuri's behalf by saying that no, independent contractors are not eligible for unemployment insurance, could not file.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Webster. Now on the agenda are three folks from the Greater Minnesota Workers Center. I'm sorry about the names. I can pronounce Casey Hudak, but the other ones I'm not sure about, so I'd ask you to come down. Please identify yourself for the tape and proceed with testimony that you might have.
All right. Thank you, Chair Winkler and representatives of the committee. My name is Casey Hudak. I'm with the East Central Area Labor Council in St. Cloud. I'm also involved with the Greater Minnesota Workers Center. And I just let you know that our third representative, Jama Ali Mad, is not here yet. He was in St. Cloud and trying to make it down, but I trust Steve here and myself can paint a picture about what's going on in Greater Minnesota and some of our concerns with this important topic that you brought up. So,
my name is Steve Fillion. I'm a professor of sociology at St. Cloud State University. I'm the director of a research group on immigrant workers in Minnesota, and I also am the current chair of the Greater Minnesota Workers Center. Casey, are you finished?
Please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Chair Winkler. If I might begin with a quote from the previous testifier, Mr. or Dr. Hines, from yesterday, I think yesterday or the day before Star Tribune, from the end of the article, has a very nice quote from him, which I think kind of sums up my sense of things as concerns the impact, as concerns immigrant workers in St. Cloud, of the tendency to make use of temporary agencies as the means for employment, and what that means for their prospects for future job security and income and wage growth and the like. It says, Mr. Hines, I would be concerned about people having to cobble together a standard of living on a sequence of temp jobs. What we have found at the Greater Minnesota Workers Center and through research that I've done at St. Cloud State University, especially with Somali workers, as you might know, St. Cloud has a population of anywhere between 8,000 to 12,000 Somali immigrant workers at the moment, and that number will only increase in the future. Is that their experience of looking for work and trying to survive has been very much affected by their need to go through temporary agencies in order to find work. And what they're experiencing is a situation which can really only be described as precarious. And the reason why that is because St. Cloud actually has been doing fairly well recently in terms of unemployment figures and jobs growth and the like. But the problem for immigrant workers especially is the kind of jobs that are available and the prospects of security through work. And because so many of these workers are having to go through temporary agencies, the stories that you're hearing from immigrant workers who are trying very hard to find work and stability in their first few years of adjustment and in the process of becoming, or in their first few years of citizenship, is they are going from job to job and they're finding work, but then they're going through long periods of unemployment. And whether that long period is 1 month or 2 months or 6 months or a year, it just depends on the individual that you're talking about. The other thing that we're finding is that they're experiencing a very high likelihood of being, as it were, on call. And what that translates into, especially for newly arrived immigrants with certain very limited skill sets and large families, is a lot of stress in an already very stressful life. And so not only are they faced with the prospect of, as Mrs. Webster Ms. Webster just finished describing, a very great likelihood of dealing with low wages, lack of basic rights on the job, lack of basic security in terms of long-term 401ks and the like. But they're also dealing with having to, at the drop of a hat, go to work. And when you have many children in your family and you have many dependents who are relying on you for your presence, that's one more stress that is added to the stress of finding work. And then finally, you have a situation also where they're very vulnerable to practices that permanent workers are not having to deal with. So, for example, we're hearing many reports from immigrant workers that they're being expected to use a debit card in order to get access to their wages, which results in their having to take out in installments their wages through the debit card and being charged surcharges for that practice. And so that's one more practice that they're having to deal with and face that permanent workers typically don't have to deal with. And we know, of course, when they're finding the work that they're finding, regardless of the kind of wages they're finding or situations they're finding, in terms of job conditions, they're not able to experience what ordinary workers experience in a job, which is a relationship with the people who are they employed by. And that is because they are employed by the staffing agency or temp agency and not the actual company. And so what you have is now immigrants being kind of funneled into the labor market in a way such that they're kind of tiered, or they're funneled into the labor market which is tiered, and temp workers and permanent workers. And the impression that they are getting in the process is that they are, for lack of a better word, second-class citizens in the job market. And that only adds to the stresses that newly arrived immigrants already deal with coming to the United States, feeling different and feeling isolated and for all intent and purposes, to one degree or another, experiencing that feeling of being second class. I wanted to note one concrete example of the difference between what we think at the Workers Center is the ideal, which is direct hire, versus temporary agencies as the means for hiring. About 8 months ago, Mr. Alamad, who was supposed to be with us today, and a colleague associated with the Workers Center went to Genio, the turkey processing company in Melrose, and requested that they go from temporary hiring to permanent direct hiring, and that they stop using one particular company in town called Work Connection, which the Somali workers especially perceived as very abusive and disrespectful of them. Genio agreed to do that and went to direct hire for newly hired workers. GMP is another company in town, a chicken processor, which to date has not agreed to go this route and continues to make use of this temporary agency Work Connection, now called True Blue, that Somali workers especially are very dissatisfied with. And when I asked the workers who were involved in getting Genio to go to direct hire, and also workers who've been now hired by Genio, the impact that this has had on them, they have said that the impact has been very real and very, very, very dramatic. They're much less likely to be fired. And when you ask them, well, why is it that you're much less likely to be fired, they tell us, it's because now when the problem happens on the line, it's dealt with the manager. In the past, if we went through this temp agency, Work Connection, and we were hired through them, when something happens on the line, the manager then, because you don't have a relationship with the manager then sends the problem to the temp agency. And to quote this one particular worker, it was about a 90% likelihood that the way in which the temp agency dealt with labor management issues that arose was firing. They simply wouldn't call you back. Furthermore, there's a sense now that the likelihood of their securing a position at the company for a longer term is also much greater. And so what we know from our discussions with workers is that where they're being hired by employers directly, the likelihood of different treatment is much greater. And I want to just note one last thing. This is not only for workers who are newly arrived who have very limited English skill sets, if they have any English language skills at all. This is also for students that I teach at St. Cloud State University from Somalia who do speak English, are graduating with BAs, some are planning on going on to do graduate degrees. And the experience that they talk about, not in the meatpacking companies, now they're employed in printer companies and packaging companies and the like, and there's a lot of this work in St. Cloud. The stories that they tell dovetail with the stories that meatpacking workers are telling, insofar as the perception they have of the experience is of one of being basically part of a crew that is second class, and that they don't really belong to the company and they have no real future. And where in the same industry, be it printing or packaging, companies are hiring through direct hire, the experience is very different. Which isn't to say it's perfect, but it's much better. And so, especially I think for immigrant workers, because if we're hoping, and St. Cloud is one of those cities that prides itself on developing its economy through expanding its immigrant workers and its immigrant labor force, and this we see as a positive thing. But if the way in which they're doing that is by funneling these workers into into work that they secure through a temporary agency, and that's the main way in which these workers are getting this kind of work, more than likely they're going to have a very difficult time doing what previous groups of immigrants have done in terms of being able to experience social mobility in this country, which is secure a good-paying job that is secure.
Representative Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the doctor about the wage structure. So there's the incentives for the employer to use these temp agencies, but is it, when you're looking at wages, is it, do you have any knowledge about how much the cost to hire temp workers and how much the employee gets, how much the agency gets?
Yeah. We know that the temp agency receives a portion of the wages, of course. What I do know from talking with workers is that the wage rate through the temp agency, the jobs that are gotten through temp agencies tend to be lower than the ones that are direct hire. And that, combined with now the kinds of benefits that they have access to are either much lower or simply non-existent.
Dr. Fillion or Mr. Hudak, could you just tell us a little bit more about what the Greater Minnesota Workers Center is?
Yeah, sure. And Steve is the chair, obviously. But really what the Workers Center comes out of is a series of conversations and meetings. In Greater Minnesota, there's a very robust social service sector that does great work, providing assistance to low-income people and the growing immigrant population, whether they need housing assistance, food assistance, even job placement. But the reality is that social service agencies are not well equipped to when their clients are facing low wages, sporadic employment, a lack of benefits, and some of the problems that Steve outlined that we're seeing in the region. So the idea of the Worker Center is for different organizations, Catholic charities, academics like Dr. Fillion, union members, to come together to support workers, provide basic workers' rights trainings, and to collaborate to make sure that workers have that support system where they otherwise wouldn't. So, the goal is to bring up the wage standards and the work conditions in Greater Minnesota, because just from my perspective as a member of a union and working in the labor movement, that the reality is we have a lot of concerns that with a growing immigrant population, both from Northeast Africa and also Latino workers who are often undocumented, these workers face a lot of exploitation in instances, and then when we go to the table to bargain with our employers as union members, there's sort of a sinking floor within the labor market that's really impacting the entire economy. So that's kind of a long answer about what the Worker Center is doing. I don't know if Steve wanted to add to that, but.
Dr. Fillion.
We're an organization that seeks to help the unorganized learn how to self-organize. And these kinds of workers, low-wage workers, are really your classic group of workers who are not able to organize. If you're a temp worker, you cannot organize. I thought I'd just share with you one short story about someone at a social service agency whose job it is to make sure that primarily Somali applicants for welfare payment for welfare services are looking for jobs and finding jobs. And their job basically is to monitor this population to be sure that they're following the process and looking for work or securing work. And this young man, Abdul, told me the story of a young woman a Somali woman who relatively new to the country, came to the agency, came to his agency, filled out all the forms, and basically her story was she had been looking for work and struggling to find work, and was very close to the point where her payments would be cut off. And so this young man, Abdul, tried everything he could to help her, but his agency is not an employment agency. It's just really basically an agency that's designed to monitor and to make sure all the rules are being followed. One morning he got a phone call from her, or a text, telling him how excited she was. I've got a job. It's down in Melrose, and it might have been at the meatpacking company. And she's so excited, I'm finally going to be off welfare, I'm finally going to be able to I have a job, and I'm going down right now. And it's a 15-mile drive, I'm going down right now. And about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he gets a text, and she says, I'm back. And he called her, and he said, what do you mean you're back? She said, well, it turns out the job was for until 2 o'clock. And now I have a job. And these kind of workers, they're in need of doing the same thing that workers all around the country are in need of doing, is organizing. And that's what past groups of immigrants have done in order to improve their situation. And so what we saw the Workers Center doing in terms of now going to a company like Genio and placing the demand that they go to direct hire, that action that we did, that's not a social service, right? But what we did was we changed a policy. We were able to get a company to change its hiring policy in a way that would have a direct impact on that particular woman, on that particular woman's ability to get off of welfare, and also on that particular woman's ability to potentially find work that would be stable and enable her family to develop. But I want to note that action didn't just affect that one particular woman. It affected a large group of workers. And so that kind of action that we engaged in, right, although it did not directly hand anybody any kind of what they call entitlements for lack of a better word, actually resulted in, we think, very real systemic policy changes that can move the economy forward in a way that we think it has to move forward if we're not to have a job that is, to quote Chris Farrell from NPR at a talk at St. Cloud State last year, the new economy is one that is going to have job growth and no wage growth. And so we think that St. Cloud and greater Minnesota needs to develop an economic model which is encouraging employers to not simply make use of temp agencies because they can cut costs and avoid their responsibility to their employees.
Representative Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find that fascinating, that sort of, would have liked to have set in on those negotiations where you're trying to convince a corporation to do something other than pursue profit, or so it was based on responsibility, that the arguments that were persuasive to convince the employer to hire directly was it because of the responsibility, or that in the long run it was going to
I think it's both their,
Dr. Fillion.
excuse me, Representative, it's both their responsibility, but also, well, their responsibility to recognize that they're providing jobs is not merely a matter of providing wages. It's a matter of playing a socially responsible role in the community. And so what we let them know is that we are an organization that is not just composed of workers, but also of faith community members, of educational institutions, social service providers, legal aid, churches. And so we're a community-based organization. And so we're watching what they do, and we're going to have a response to that, to their policies. And so that when they're dealing with what they might appear to be workers that they can simply take for granted because they're just temporary workers, they're just immigrant workers, they don't have much in the way of English skills, they don't have any representation on the work floor, well, they're actually part of a broader community that is concerned about their fate and sees their fate tied in with the broader community's capacity to experience real economic development.
Representative Allen. I'm sorry, Ward. Believe it or not, I know you too well enough to know that you're not the same person.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Winkler. I don't want to digress with this, but I want to comment a little bit on what I was hearing right from the very beginning when you're talking about the stress that temporary workers are under, and given the immigration complications and the challenges of new citizens, language and everything else. Several years ago, there was a great deal of press about school issues, conflicts in the schools with the Somali community and the students. And as you were talking about these families being under such stress, I thought, and then you've got a kid in school who is being challenged in some very difficult ways as well. And what I'm hearing you saying, and I haven't heard much recently about school issues, bullying, and that there was a great deal of conflict in the schools. So I'm wondering if part of your work in integrating responsibility, accountability, and respect in the workplace is also then carrying over into the schools, which would have a significant impact in terms of students' abilities to learn.
Are you saying, do we get involved in these kind of issues, or?
No, I'm wondering if that's just, if I'm not hearing things about, I'm sorry, sir. Representative Winkler.
Go ahead.
Thank you. No, for clarification, I'm wondering if there is a correlation.
Yeah, Representative, I think in terms of the kinds of tensions that exist in a place like St. Cloud, in terms of especially the racial tensions, very often what we overlook is that these new groups, in order to establish themselves, in order to be able to integrate into the community, are going to need the same thing the previous immigrant groups have needed in order to succeed, and that's going to be stable jobs and stable families. It's very hard for us to see how that is going to occur if we're neglecting now the impact that, say, the use of temporary agencies as the means to funnel this population into the labor market is having. I mean, you cannot have, because what you have essentially is, especially for newly arrived groups, is the experience of being relative to groups that have been there for longer periods of time, a sense of inequality. Well, that inequality cannot be overcome if let us all learn how to get along, right? And let us all learn to respect each other. But one group is still at the bottom of the economic ladder because they're not experiencing increases in wages or increases in job security or benefits. Then we've learned how to understand and mutually respect each other's identities and differences. But the reality is that you still have a separate but equal situation there, which is only going to create tensions that are going to be interpreted as racial or cultural, where in fact, in many ways, these tensions are very much economically driven. And so how do we change that if the group that is perceived as, or perceives itself as misunderstood, is not only experiencing the feeling of being misunderstood and discriminated against on the basis of color or religion, but also in the labor market is not experiencing any real substantial improvement.
And Mr. Chair, Representative Ward, I just speak to that because we work closely with teachers in our organization, and I just spoke to with the St. Cloud Education Association, and they're going to be supporting this work for that very reason that you brought up. St. Cloud, in a lot of ways, isn't necessarily equipped to deal with the influx of immigrants, and there's a lot of tension between the different cultures that are there. The district is over 50% poverty at this point, and I just say that the reason they want to support this is they have seen sort of spillover into the classroom when we don't have a fully accommodating system, whether that's in schools or at the workplace. So yeah, I think that's definitely part of what we're trying to do here. So.
And one of our concerns, Representative, is simply if you have students who are getting educated and under the best circumstances getting college degrees, but then they're leaving. They're going to Minneapolis, Chicago, and the like. So what remains now is the portion of the immigrant community that does not have those degrees. And if they're still continuing to lag and experiencing no movement forward economically, the problems that we're talking about are just going to fester and get worse, even under the best conditions, where we solve those education problems. Because the economy that we have is one that's creating jobs that the graduates don't want.
Representative Kiefer, and then I'm hoping that Representative Kiefer gets the last question in because we have a number of other testifiers here.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I really just have a comment. I just have to say our overarching problem is we don't have well-paying jobs in Minnesota. And we can micromanage to death and organize if you want to and put mandates on the businesses. All it's going to do is make them make more, as you said, economically driven decisions. That's the way it is. That's just what happens. So, when we're looking at trying to get people into jobs that offer good benefits, what are we doing instead? We've got health care mandates now that are incentivizing businesses to keep people under 30 hours of work or keep people under 50 employees in a business. And so, if anyone in this room can look at this from another perspective, please consider that what Minnesota's doing is increasing taxes, increasing the cost of doing business, putting more mandates on employers. Why do employers hire temporary? There must be some economically driven decision. It must save them money. So let's figure out a way that it doesn't save them money. And sorry, temp people, I love you, and I think you serve a great purpose in the marketplace. But it sounds like they're getting beaten up because you don't like what they're doing. Well, then let's figure out a way to incentivize businesses to get the well-paying jobs across the board. Let's get people demanding to have more employees. And maybe this would take care of the problems. We can't micromanage. I think what we're experiencing here is unintended consequences from 20 years of micromanaging in this state. The taxes, the cost of doing business, everything is too high. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me a couple minutes to say my piece.
Representative Kiefer, I knew that it was coming, I just didn't know when. So we appreciate that, of course.
Thank
That's
you.
why we're bipartisan. Thank you for your testimony. Next on my list is Jordan Ash. And Representative Kiefer, by the way, there is a representative from the Minnesota Recruiting and Staffing Association on the list, too.
Right.
And they will get the last word.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Ash, if you could identify yourself for the record and proceed, please.
Yeah, my name is Jordan Ash, and I'm with Local 26 of the Service Employees International Union. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. 12 years ago, janitors who cleaned office buildings in the Twin Cities earned minimum wage with no paid holidays, sick days, or vacation. They didn't get any health insurance, and they could only work 4 hours per night. This had not always been the case. Property owners who used to hire janitors directly were contracting out the cleaning. The contractors were in fierce competition with each other and cut their workers' wages. Workers organized as a union, and as part of the Justice for Janitors campaign, they won a voice at work and raised standards in the industry, transforming poverty wages into livable wages. Now the contractors who work in this field are responsible. They pay decent wages and provide health insurance for their employees. These contractors have also signed a master union contract, which not only provides a guaranteed wage and benefit structure for their employees, but also sets out decent working conditions. So janitors who clean office buildings in the Twin Cities now work 8-hour shifts. They earn $14 an hour. They get paid holidays, sick days, and vacation, and basic benefits that many of us take for granted. And have individual health insurance that only costs them $30 a month and family coverage for $150 a month. However, janitors who clean department stores face the same problems that janitors who cleaned office buildings faced 12 years ago. The janitorial companies try to underbid each other. And since labor is by far the largest and most costly expense in a cleaning contract, the company with the lowest labor cost tends to win the contract. In some cases, the janitorial companies try to reduce their labor costs through illegal practices. A number of the companies that clean big box stores in Minnesota have been the subject of lawsuits and Department of Labor investigations for not paying their workers the overtime wages they earned. For instance, Diversified Maintenance, which is based in Florida, is the largest janitorial service provider to Target, with contracts covering over 600 stores nationwide. Earlier this year, the company settled a lawsuit for $675,000 that had been filed by workers in Minnesota who charged that the company required them to work 8-hour shifts 7 days a week. They would get overtime for the sixth day, but on the seventh day they had to punch in on a time card for an employee who no longer worked for the company. On payday, that ghost employee was issued a check, which the company cashed and then paid the worker in cash at a straight-time rate for the seventh day. The way in which Target drove the prices down so low in its janitorial contracts came to light in a lawsuit brought by cleaning workers in Texas. Target structured its bidding process in order to pit cleaning contractors against each other. Target would have 3 rounds of bidding with a rule that each cleaning contractor could submit a lower bid, but not a higher bid in each successive round. There's been a similar trend in other industries, for instance, at the airport. Traditionally, airlines directly hired many of the people who worked at the airport, such as skycaps, wheelchair attendants, cabin cleaners, baggage handlers, but these positions have increasingly been contracted out to other companies. Now, 1 out of every 4 airport jobs nationally is with a subcontractor. The race to the bottom among contractors has driven down wages as low as they can go for hundreds of subcontracted workers at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport who earn at or near minimum wage. Just 4 years ago, people who cleaned inside the aircraft for Delta Airlines earned $9 to $11 an hour. Then Delta changed contractors, and the new contractor started people at $7.25 an hour. The people who started 4 years ago are now making $8.10 an hour, and that's as high as it can go. Even for those janitors and workers who are organized in our union and who are paid a living wage with health insurance and benefits, they only have limited job security because they're in contracted industries. A property owner can decide that they want to cut costs and no longer want to have the people who clean their building be paid a living wage. They can bring in a non-union contractor, and the contractor is under no obligation to hire any of the existing workers. This is the situation we are facing at a couple buildings right now. For instance, at a building in downtown Minneapolis called Plaza 7, it was bought earlier this year by a company based in San Francisco that owns 24 properties on the West Coast. The head of the company, Sigurd Anderson, is from Minnesota, and the company has decided to start acquiring properties here in Minnesota. They recently signed a purchase agreement to buy the former Macy's in downtown St. Paul. This company brought in a new cleaning contractor that refused to even consider hiring any of the workers who had been cleaning the building for years. The new contractor is paying $10 an hour with no benefits. Another situation is with St. Jude, the medical device maker. St. Jude has been one of the main opponents of having to pay the medical device tax, which is one of the funding mechanisms for the Affordable Care Act. However, the company is pushing its own employees onto Obamacare. Last year, St. Jude laid off hundreds of workers at its Minnesota headquarters, and then just recently, St. Jude brought in a different cleaning contractor to replace the contractor that had been paying $14 an hour with affordable health insurance. The new contractor has not hired any of the previous janitors and pays lower wages and does not provide health insurance. Tim Steck, who's listed on the agenda, is one of the employees who was laid off from St. Jude. He actually had to leave to go to a job interview. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ash. Questions? Okay, thank you. And I have, it's not on the list, but Enrique, I don't know what your last name is, I'm sorry. You could identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Enrique Bárcenas.
So good afternoon, my name is Enrique Bárcenas, and also my name is Ruth Schultz, and I'm with CETUL, the Centro de Trabajadores Unidos en Lucha, and I'll be translating.
Please proceed.
Okay, mi nombre es Enrique Bárcenas, vuelvo a repetir, trabajo en Prestige, en limpieza, limpiando las tardes por la noche.
So I'll repeat, my name is Enrique Bárcenas, and I work for Prestige, cleaning a Target store in the nighttime.
Por lo que he escuchado aquí anteriormente con los compañeros, todos coincidimos en lo mismo.
So I've been listening to, the other partners around here in the table, and a lot of what we're saying is the same thing.
El problema es el salario.
There's a big problem with wages.
Quiero comentarles que es difícil sobrevivir con un sueldo tan bajo de $8.
So I want to comment to you about how difficult it is to survive on a wage making $8 an hour.
Tal vez ustedes no tengan idea de lo que es estirar el poco dinero que se gana.
Maybe some people in this room haven't experienced having to stretch your paycheck.
Es muy difícil y espero que entiendan. Estamos aquí para que ustedes busquen una solución.
And it's very difficult, so we're here so we can all find a solution.
Un ejemplo de ello es se descompuso mi carro.
So an example of this is that my car broke down.
Son $500.
It will be $500 to fix it.
Yo gano $800.
And I make $800.
Se viene Navidad, ¿qué hago? ¿Carro o Navidad?
800 a la semana o la quincena. So I make $800 every 2 weeks, and Christmas is coming, so what do? Do I fix my car, or do I have a little money for Christmas?
Es difícil tomar decisiones, pero se tienen que hacer. Es lo mismo como ustedes también tienen que tomar decisiones y pues que sea en beneficio para todos nosotros.
And so, so those decisions are difficult to make, and it's the same as everyone in this room. We all have to make those kinds of decisions, and so, we're looking for a solution that is in the benefit of all of us.
Yo siento que ya es momento de que se tomen las decisiones correctas para beneficiar a todos los compañeros que ganamos ese salario.
So I think it's time that, we make those decisions to benefit all low-wage workers.
También quiero agregar
I'd also like to add,
como ustedes saben, como dicen, la democracia es un punto, no es un círculo.
so he says, or like you all know, the saying, democracy is a point, it's not a circle.
Alguna persona dijo que la democracia es un punto, no es un círculo, y el punto es el corazón, y el corazón somos todos los que estamos aquí.
And the point is your heart, and the heart is all of the people that are here in this room.
a lo mejor no me entienden, pero si le toman un poquito de razón, se darán cuenta que es verdad, la democracia es el corazón, no es el cerebro.
And so if you, maybe you don't understand that, but the democracy is in your heart, it's not in the brain.
Y si ustedes tienen corazón, esto se va a solucionar.
And if all of you have heart, then this will find a solution.
Yo veo la voluntad en sus ojos
I see the will in your eyes,
y espero que nos ayuden.
and I hope
Gracias.
that you help us. Habla de los contratos, como están cortando.
Por otro lado, los contratos que yo he mirado que existen entre la compañía que yo trabajo con Target,
So, on another issue, I'd like to talk about the contracts that my company has with Target and what I've seen.
10 años atrás se ganaban entre 10 y 12 dólares la hora.
So, about 10 years ago, people were making $10 to $12 an hour,
Ahora es de 8 dólares. O sea, yo no entiendo esa lógica.
and now I make $8 an hour. So, I don't understand that logic.
No necesito ser empresario para entender la política que ellos manejan.
And I don't need to be, a big business owner to understand the policies that they use.
Yo pongo en oferta el trabajo y digo, ¿quién paga menos? ¿O quién paga más? ¿O quién cobra menos?
I put out an offer for work, but then someone comes and, says, oh, I'll charge less. Who will charge me less for this job?
Y si yo veo que alguien cobra menos, pues yo lo contrato. Y entonces, ¿qué pasa? Lo contrato y los que trabajan para mí, les voy a pagar poquito.
And so, if I see someone is going to charge less for a job, then I'm obviously going to contract with them, and then the people who work are making less.
Y los únicos beneficiados son los que están arriba, en medio, porque los de abajo los pisan más.
And the only people who benefit are the ones at the top, and maybe in the middle, but the ones at the bottom, they get stepped on.
No sé qué piensan ustedes, y a lo mejor es para que reflexionen.
So I don't know what you think. That's just a thought to reflect on.
I have one question. I wonder if you could just tell me more about your organization.
Tiene una pregunta, si puede hablar un poco más acerca de CETUL y qué es la organización de CETUL.
La organización de CETUL está vinculada a luchar por los trabajadores que sufren injusticias como robo de salarios.
So CETUL is an organization of low-wage workers that, fights for rights, and especially, when things happen like wage theft, people aren't getting paid on time.
Todo tipo de problemas relacionados con el trabajo, con exceso, maltrato, discriminación.
In all of those types of problems that can come up on the job. So, mistreatment on the job or discrimination.
Y también estamos expuestos a las amenazas de que si te gusta, bien, y si no, pues vete.
And also, workers who find themselves in the threats of the situation. Well, if you like how this job is, then fine. But if you don't, then you can leave. There's the door.
Si ustedes se dan cuenta, en lugar de que uno sea una persona útil y productiva,
Sí.
lo hacen a uno ser una carga para ustedes.
No entiendo lo que estás diciendo.
O sea que si uno no produce, si uno no es útil a la sociedad, es una carga para...
Oh, so if someone isn't a productive worker, someone doesn't produce, then they become like a weight on the society. No entiendo. I'll just add a little bit too about CETUL. We're 6 years old. We formed in 2006, low-wage worker center based out of Minneapolis, and worked a lot with workers coming in with lots of different problems, doing know your rights trainings and helping workers understand how to defend their rights on the job and win better things on the job, and working with workers always for themselves, representing themselves, and arranging or solving the problems in their work. And one of the reasons why we met Enrique and what we're working with subcontracted cleaning workers is there was a lot of problems in the cleaning industry that were coming through our door. And so we decided to try and make a larger change in the industry. Instead of being firefighters putting out little fires all over the place, trying to make a larger change in the industry and raise the floor in this industry that it has very much subcontracted labor.
Algo muy sencillo y rápido que les quiero comentar. Si una persona gana $100,000 al año,
So one last fast and simple thing I want to comment, if someone makes $100,000 a year
y yo gano 16 al año,
and I make $16,000 a year,
en la compañía que estoy todavía pagan overtime,
in the company that I work, they still give workers overtime hours.
si no fuera por el overtime ganaría yo alrededor de unos $10,000, $11,000 al año.
And so if it wasn't for working those overtime hours, I'd make about $10,000, $11,000 a year.
Imaginen ustedes, esas personas pueden guardar al año $50,000, $100,000, ahorrarlos en el banco. Yo lo único que puedo ahorrar serían $700 a $1,000 al año.
You know, and so if someone makes $100,000, you know, they might be able to save $20,000 a year, $50,000 a year. But making that amount of money, I can only save maybe $600 a year.
Eso es todo, gracias.
And that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. So we'll take the time because we've gone over a bit, but I have Jim Johnson from the Minnesota Recruiting and Staffing Association. You could identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony, please. I think you have a handout?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you,
it's in our
Chairman and committee members. Good afternoon. My name is Jim Johnson, and I'm here today representing, as you mentioned, MNRSA, the Minnesota Recruiting and Staffing Association. My goal today is to tell you a little bit about who I am, who we are as an organization, and what our mission is going forward. And I'm just going to kind of follow along on the handout, and I'd be happy to take any questions, of course, when we're done. Here locally, my wife Jolene and I are franchise owners with Express Employment Professionals. We're a Minnesota-owned corporation. We're a women-owned Minnesota corporation, and we are both small business and ISO certified. My wife and I own 4 different Express offices. All 4 are here in the metro, which actually is 3 different franchises with Express: Chanhassen, Eagan, and Edina, Minnesota. We employ 25 regular full-time employees in our office, and our biggest week this year we had 600 temporary and contract workers out on assignment. So just to give you an idea of kind of the size and scope that we have. We also do direct hire placements and recruitment services at virtually all different levels of employment. Statewide, speaking of Express still at this point, we have 22 office locations across Minnesota. 11 of those are here in the metropolitan area, and 11 are in greater Minnesota. Combined in the year 2012, we did just under 6,500 W-2s in the state, and we've been members of the state association here for 30 years since the first office came to the state back in 1983. Nationally, to talk a little bit about Express, the corporation was formed in 1983, so it's 30 years old. Headquarters is Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They are $2.5 billion in annual revenues, and a point to be noted there is that they've doubled their size since 2009. So prior, when Mr. Hine was speaking about post-recession, that is true. Our industry typically is the first to come and the first to go, and I'll talk a little bit more about, we call that flexibility, obviously, why we've been called back in big numbers since the last recession. Express is the largest privately held staffing firm in the U.S. with 650 U.S. franchise locations. We have no corporate stores. 100% of all of our offices are owned by owner-operators like my wife and I across the country. Most of those, nearly 65% of those, are husband-wife teams that own these franchise opportunities. And I just heard this month now that Express is the largest industrial staffing company in the U.S. That just happened this month, where we became the #1 largest. So some of you may not have heard of Express. The fact that you may not have is we are privately held, so we don't have stock, and we're not. You hear a lot more about the Manpowers and the Kellys of the world, but yet we are the largest industrial staffing firm in the nation. And we will employ 400,000 people this year. That's how many W-2s we'll put out in aggregate. And I did mention the benefits. They were mentioned earlier. That is our standard benefit package across our 650 office locations. And these are national numbers for Express. Our CEO was just written up in the Wall Street Journal talking about the build-up after the recession and the wave towards temporary help. And these were numbers that he stated in his article. The average wage for 2013 year-to-date is $15.79 an hour. That's across these 400,000 associates that were paid. Average hours of work is right at 37 hours a week on average. So the theory that they're very part-time is not really validated. It's nearly full-time at 37 hours. And the range of pay across all 50 states is a low of $9.10 an hour to a high of $82.99 an hour. I can speak to my 3 franchise locations. Our lowest pay rate is $10 an hour of any client that we work with, and that's been the case all year long this year. I want to draw your attention. I highlighted the next box in yellow, and that the 3 years since the end of the Great Recession, the U.S. staffing and recruiting industry has created more jobs than any other single industry in America. From June 2009 to July 2012, America's staffing companies added more than 786,000 jobs to their payrolls, and there still remains more than 4 million job openings in the United States right now. So very robust recovery, very robust time, and they're coming to the staffing profession to outsource those needs in large volume. To change now to the Minnesota Recruiting and Staffing Association, I have just a handful of bullet points there. The industry's been around serving Minnesotans for 40 years, serving our member companies for 40 years, and the association services staffing firms from border to border in Minnesota, from Tower, Minnesota to Albert Lea, Minnesota. We employ pretty good size numbers here at nearly 53,000 employees a day and 242,000 per year. Nearly 90,000 employees in Minnesota use temporary employment as a bridge to a permanent job. I'm going to make a note there and come back to it. The word permanent's kind of being lost now as a word going forward. We still have it here on our brochure, but it's a word you don't hear much of anymore. We've talked a lot about the word permanent today, but I read a lot in this profession, and Career Builder has just said that the average tenure of a job will be 3 years or less in this new economy that was mentioned, and that 60% of people polled this year say that they will have a new job or are currently looking for a new job by next year. So it's a very, very fluid environment out there. It's a very changing economy, and the new economy is one that the permanency that we've seen in all of our careers. I mean, I've been doing this 20 years. That's something that's not going to be as prevalent going forward. People are looking for the next opportunity. We'll be moving around quite frequently. The staffing industry in Minnesota pays nearly $1.3 billion annual payroll. We have across all spectrums, Ms. Webster mentioned that, everything from light industrial up to legal, accounting, IT, you name it. And that most of our members are smaller companies doing less than $12.5 million annual revenue, so many of us are qualified for SBA certification. We could turn the page over. These statistics are from the American Staffing Association, which our state association ties up to and is a member of. And there are really 5 reasons why both our employees, our temporary associates meaning, and our clients benefit by outsourcing our employment services practices that we provide. Number 1 is jobs. I mentioned in the yellow box that we've created more jobs since the recession than any other profession or industry that is out there. Number 2 is flexibility. It allows companies to use us when they need us for projects, for seasonal work. It allows employees also to use us when they most need it, so they can create their own schedules and hours, and a lot of them like that flexibility with their families, and it gives them a sense of freedom that they don't have otherwise. Number 3 is the bridge to employment. I mentioned how many people end up getting regular full-time jobs as a part of what we do. That one is huge. Nearly 40% of the people I put out end up working regular full-time with the client companies I send them to. And that number has been consistent over the years. Not so high in the depths of the recession. 2009, 2010, our profession and me personally, our business was cut in half in 2009, 2010. And now we are finally back right now to our 2007 kind of high water level prior to the recession. But the bridge to employment is huge. It's becoming more, we always use the analogy that you don't get married without dating. Employers really like now to try an employee before they hire them. It gets more difficult with every single year to disengage with a worker, and so therefore they want to really do their work up front and make sure that that's a worker that they want to continue to employ. So call it dating prior to marriage. And then choice is number 4. The fact that typically we have options for employees in almost every case. They come in, we interview, we reference check, we look at their work history, we look at their skills, availability, and past performance, and then we give them an option. Would you like to do this job or this job or this job? They have a choice to pick hours, location, how far they want to drive, if it has to be a busable location or a position where they have access to their own transportation, etc. People like those choices, and that's different than a company hiring on their own. If a company is going to hire for their own location, they can't offer them the same types of options that we do when they come in. It's more of a smorgasbord of opportunities. And then number 5, and finally, is the training that people get while they're on assignments for us. And included in that is the training that we provide in our office, and that might be interview training. We prep candidates on how to interview for jobs, how to dress. Behavioral-based interviewing is a big thing now. We talk to people about what that will look like and what companies will want to know when they're talking to them to gain full-time employment. And they learn new skills while they're on the jobs as well. So with that, I will close, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Chair Winkler. Mr. Johnson, just wanted to ask about this 4 million jobs remain open in America. How would you characterize those jobs? And is that everything? What is the character and what's the wage?
Yes, that's across the whole board too, and that was also that came out of our CEO's article in the Wall Street Journal when they interviewed him. That was a statistic that they used, that there are that many jobs currently open in the United States.
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Chair Winkler. And we still have something of an unemployment problem. Where's the mismatch on that?
Johnson.
Yes, the unemployment is going down, of course. It has in Minnesota, dropped a full point just recently, and the nation's following a little slower behind that. But there is a gap in skills. It seems like most of the trouble falls with employers not being able to find the right skills right now that they need. The articles I read we're kind of back to pre-recession, where people are starting apprentices and working them into roles, teaching people through internships, and even hiring or training people the skills that they need rather than going out and find them out in the marketplace already. Because the skills have really changed. If you look at the last robust time that we had prior to the recession would have been back in 2006 and 2007. And it's a different world out there right now. A different set of skills are needed in a lot of the jobs going forward than that were needed pre-recession. So there's a skills gap.
Mr. Johnson, just one last question. On your American Staffing Association sheet, under choice, it said 23% of staffing employees have little or no interest in a permanent job, which is a little different from what Mr. Hines said about 30-some% being satisfied with that work arrangement. I guess the question would be to either you or Mr. Hines to see if you can kind of reconcile your numbers.
Yeah, well, I think there are apples and oranges. I would say that most of our associates do want to go regular full-time ultimately with a company that we can provide them to. That's a thing that they like, but they also are very interested in trying the job before they commit to the job and having choices of jobs. It's not unusual that someone will go on 3 or 4 assignments with us before they kind of land at one that they like and stick with. This stat, the 23%, says that those are people that don't have interest. So The majority then still does have interest in going regular full-time, but 23% of those don't have, and those are people purely that like the flexibility of different assignments and the lifestyle and the flexibility. Some of those might be older in their work careers where they like to go out and work different jobs, meet different people, and try different things. There is a whole set of group, and some of those are the independent contractors we talked about as well. They go out and do things. We don't do any independent contractors, of course. We are full bona fide W-2 employers, but we do provide people that would compete against an independent contractor. A lot of times companies would have a choice to go with an independent contractor or go with a recruitment firm like ours.
Mr. Chair, I saw the same.
Representative Kiefer.
I saw the same thing. I think it just shows you can always play with numbers a little bit. I thought they were pretty close. I just decided to take an average.
All right. Any further questions? Thank you for your, Mr. Hines is nodding agreeably, so I think he's okay with what you said.
Yeah, we could easily explain away that
Yeah.
gap of 9%.
Yeah. Okay, the numbers were closer than I was remembering. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Johnson, and thank you to everyone who was in attendance today, and the members. We are adjourned.